Hey everybody, thank you for joining us. I got a special guest with me here today. I got Andy Geers, the CEO of Discipleship Tech. Andy, how you doing, man? Thanks for being here with us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Andy, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the amazing things that you've just shared with me that you do.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Andy. I live in London. I'm married to Elise, and we've got three primary school aged kids. Uh, since kind of the youngest age, I suppose I've always had two great loves: Jesus and computer coding. So I've been coding since I was about five, and I've always had that kind of fascination with how those two things connect my faith and my technology. And yeah, so um, I spent a lot of my life as an adult trying to sort of, in particular, make a Christian computer game. I've always thought games are just a fantastic way to, would be a fantastic way to explore the Bible because you can kind of, I don't know, you get to explore at your own pace. You can kind of wander around, look at things. You can talk to people, ask questions, and kind of go as deep as you like, but all at your own pace. And um, yeah, always made me kind of a bit sad that nothing out there seemed to really kind of live up to that kind of vision of what I thought it could be. So I tried that for about 10 years, and it was for various reasons I just wasn't getting anywhere, and it was really hard. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any of the skills or the collaborators or the money to really make it work. And then, sort of out of the blue, when I sort of got one of the early iPads when they were quite new, and was just sort of playing around with one, and uh, this idea came to me that it might be a really good format for a kind of prayer list app. So I was, at the time, I was using a paper prayer journal, and um, uh, kind of I would have my list of people to pray for regularly, and then completely separately in my email inbox, I'd have a bunch of prayer letters from people saying, "Can you pray this for me? And can you pray that for me?" But there was just this massive disconnect between the two, and I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if on an iPad or something you could have a suggestion of, right, here's the people to pray for today, and here's their latest prayer letter, and all the notes you've written about how to pray and that kind of stuff. And so that really, from that came the idea of this app, Prayer Mates, that I started that about 10, just, well, this year it's just had its 10th anniversary actually. So and that really kind of took over from the game, because in a very short time I had a working prototype that people were using and finding valuable, and it was, yeah, just grew and grew. And unlike the game, that at that time didn't really seem to be going anywhere. So I did that as a hobby until about 2016, at which point I left my job as a software developer, and I was able to go full time on PrayerMate, which is like a dream come true, really. And then we set up a charity, Discipleship Tech, which you mentioned, to sort of, yeah, because it was obvious that enough people depended on PrayerMate. I think by that stage it had long since reached sort of 100,000 downloads, and it was obviously
Wow, that's cool.
much bigger than what one person could look after. So it was great to have the structure of a proper charity and the trustees, and then that's allowed us to grow the team and hire and raise a bit more money as well. So I've been doing that for the last 5 years, and then more recently, it's given me the chance to go back to that original passion, I suppose, of trying to make a viable computer game. And so we've been developing this concept called the Serpent and the Seed, which is a kind of Bible overview adventure game thing, and we've been building a little team around that.
All right, that's great. I love that. Yeah, that prayer app sounds pretty cool. And so you were working on the game, you said, for about 10 years. You switched to the prayer mate, and now you're back on the game. And mate, you've been on the journey, right? I think that you know, you're obviously someone who has a heart for what you're doing, right? Otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. I tell
Mm,
people all the time that when you start doing something like this, it's a labor of love, right?
mm,
Because there's like tons of sacrifice, there's tons of work to be done, and often it's a lonely road, right?
mm, yeah.
And I think it's actually amazing that, like, you know, you've been brought back into the video game. You kind of mentioned to me about how that vision kind of got rekindled a bit, right, with
Mm.
the hackathon in London. And so I guess like the next question that I wanted to ask you, as a Christian making a Christian Bible-based video game, why? Like, why is that? Why are you doing this? What is the relevance of this in today's society? Do you think kids need these types of things? Over to you.
Yeah. Well, I probably have two kind of answers to that actually. One is just I think a video game is. I still remain convinced of that fundamental thing I started with, that I think a video game could be an amazing way to teach the Bible. So I really recently watched a really interesting lecture by a chap called Jonathan Blow, who is a very kind of well-respected games designer. He designed a game called Braid a while back and something called The Witness. But he does a lot of talks that are really interesting, and not a Christian as far as I can tell, but he did this one called Design Reboot, and his premise was that all games teach truth, and within the game you have this kind of laws of the game that are truth during those minutes when you're playing the game. And um, he said, more and actually those truths then kind of go beyond the game itself, but they are teaching you something about the world itself. And he said, more and more people are playing games, and the big question is, what are we teaching all these people?
Yeah.
I don't know quite what I think his where he was going with that was, let's make sure it's something that matters. But I've always sort of thought that's true. I played a game as a kid called Day of the Tentacle, where it's a really sort of silly comedy game, but you meet the founding fathers of America when they're writing the U.S. Constitution, and I didn't know anything about the U.S. Constitution before that point. But that game, I mean, it's total nonsense what they teach you, and there's loads of silly gags and things, but I did learn something, and
Yeah.
I think not in a kind of cringy educational we're going to teach you the Bible kind of way, but I think if you can make a genuinely interesting and engaging game set in the story of the Bible, I think it just could be a great way to get people to kind of engage with those truths in a way they otherwise never would.
Yeah.
I mean, related to that, perhaps the other answer to your question is, I think we need to get people into the Bible. So the hackathon you mentioned, I was a part of a group called Kingdom Code, who try and help Christians in the world of technology to kind of live out their faith where they are. And we did a hackathon a few years ago where the Bible Society came in and sponsored it, and they presented this research they've commissioned recently, where they did a massive survey of sort of 150,000 UK adults or something like that, and they discovered that a quarter of the UK population is open to engaging with the Bible, but they identified various kind of impediments to that, like they just don't see how it's relevant to life today, or they can't see how the big Bible story fits together, and therefore when you're reading a bit of the Bible, how does it fit into the whole? And for me, that kind of took me back to that, my kind of original passion project of making a Bible game. And I thought, could we do something? I mean, at that stage I was thinking maybe something around the final week of Jesus's life, sort of Palm Sunday through to the cross and the resurrection. So we had a team got together at the hackathon. We kind of explored the idea. It didn't really kind of go anywhere at that stage, but that question, I suppose, has always stuck with me. There is this latent interest in the Bible, but for whatever reason, people aren't. We're not tapping into that. People aren't at the stage where they want to come to church or Bible study. And I've always thought, people are playing games, like Jonathan Blow says. Lots more and more people are playing games.
Yeah.
How could we make those games teach them something that's true and meaningful and eternal, rather than just rubbish, really? And so that's another hackathon I took part in last year, called COVID Hack, I think, something like that, and it was organized by Faith Tech in the US, and they sort of said, during this pandemic, this unprecedented time of need worldwide, and how can we bring our skill set to bear to help the church and or as the church to help the world. And my wife used to work for a Christian charity called Cross Teach, who would go into schools and run these kind of interactive workshops to help kids engage with the Easter story or the Christmas story. And they got this really fun Easter experience, which is kind of like a murder mystery. So you go through these 4 zones: the victim's last meal of his friends, something in the garden, the tomb where you meet the soldier who was there at the victim's execution and can interview them, and then the 4th one was the sorry, I missed out the trial, where the victim was on trial. And yeah, normally they go into to a church and invite a class. Well, loads of classes of school kids would come in over the course of a week, and they couldn't do it because of the pandemic. So during this hackathon, we had a week where we thought, well, could we build an online interactive web version of this? And so we worked with Cross Teach and had their help and stuff, and came out of a really fun little prototype. Certainly by the end of 2 weeks, we got the whole thing sketched out, and it was really fun, and both for us, and I tested it with my kids, and they absolutely loved it. And that, for me, I think, just sort of rekindled this passion, because I thought previously my experience was, I spent 10 years and just got nowhere, and it just felt like this endless slog. Whereas here, after 2 weeks, we had a proof of concept that showed, this is worth investing in further. And it made me realize that a game doesn't have to be this sort of epic kind of lifelong kind of thing. So that gave me the perspective to think, right, well, how could we I knew I wanted to do a kind of Bible overview. I've got a couple of kids. There's something called the Garden, the Curtain, and the Cross, that's got these beautiful illustrations and things, but it's quite a simple Bible overview, really. And so I kind of took an afternoon off, and I thought, right, I'm going to sit down with a piece of paper. How can we do? I mean, I think perhaps 5 chapters, I thought then, but we've simplified it to 4 now. So chapter 1, you start in the Garden of Eden, and you meet Adam, you hear him talking about this amazing God who made him and who he gets to meet with, and you see Eve getting created, and you help Adam name some animals, plant some stuff, and but ultimately ending at these 2 trees and this big dilemma. Are they going to trust God and let God make the rules, or are they going to take matters into their own hands and eat the fruit? And we all know what happened, don't we? Yeah, looking at that Genesis 3, where you've got the curse. God curses the ground, he curses the childbearing, and he curses the snake, but it ends with this great promise of the seed of the woman who will crush the head of the seed of the serpent. And so then I thought, well, how can we trace that through the rest of the Bible? So Act 2, the idea is a kind of very high level overview of the rest of the Old Testament, but basically asking this question of who is the seed. So you've got all these different candidates. Like, is it going to be Noah? Well, no, because he ends up drunk in a tent. Or is it going to be David? Well, he shows some promise. He defeats Goliath, which is looking great, but it's not him. But as you kind of explore these different candidates, you get, actually, the promise gets bigger and bigger. Abraham gets his promise of his seed who will be a blessing to the whole world. Or David, his seed there's going to be a king in the line of David forever, and a prophet like Moses. And so you kind of, at the end of Act 2, you kind of think, well, I still don't really know who the seed is, but this character is now even bigger. There's even more expectation and stuff.
Yeah.
And then Act 3, the idea is to revisit that kind of last week of Jesus's life, the triumphal entry onwards, and obviously got the Garden of Gethsemane with some real echoes of Eden, this kind of man wrestling with whether he's going to trust God or not. And I mean, Act 4, or Act 3 would end with the crucifixion, and then Act 4, resurrection and new creation. Yeah,
that's cool.
I'm really excited about it, and that the structure allows us to sort of take just a piece of it. So we're focusing on Act 1, the garden, and just trying to make that as fun as we possibly can. There's so much potential for kind of interactivity, and we're working with some amazing musicians in America, a husband and wife couple, but they call themselves Paul Bishop Hooper, and they just do this amazing music. Their main thing is this project called Every Psalm at the moment, where every week on a Wednesday they're releasing a song based on each psalm, basically. So they're sort of year and a half into it now, so up to Psalm 90, and yeah, they really specialize in beautiful songs, but inspired by the words of Scripture. And they've done this amazing song based on that curse in Genesis 3, and ending with that promise of the seed of the serpent, and no, sorry, seed of the woman who will crush the head of the seed of the serpent.
Yeah.
And really excited about it. It's very kind of, yeah, it sends chills down your spine when you kind of hear it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think if we can get players through that first chapter to the song, then it's yeah, I don't know where the game goes after that, but that's our aim at the moment.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It sounds like fun. I do think that I agree with you on your first point. We're just talking about what's his name, Bo? Is that
Jonathan Blow.
Low?
Blow.
I would agree 100% that video games are, powerful pedagogical
Mm,
tools.
mm,
And game designers, whether they intentionally do it or not, they end up teaching the player or the gamer something, right?
mm,
Um, Even games like Fortnite, research shows that, people end up learning certain things or kind of changing the perception of other things because of games like Fortnite.
mm,
And that just comes from excessive gameplay. Do you know what I mean? And so I would agree that actually um, creating a game where they show like the truth, right? The truth of the
mm,
Bible is absolutely paramount in
mm,
today's society, right? And to the other thing that you mentioned about, about the escape room, that you're like proof of concept, like I think that children and young people and adults, right? Like everybody loves games. And I
yeah.
think that people um, love games more than we realize we love games, or more than some people would admit. I'll admit I love games. I love playing video games. And I think that even if you so I live in Manchester, I live in the Northwest, you live in London, but ever since I've come to England, one of the things that I've found really important in English culture is like a pub quiz, right?
Really.
Like where I'm from, I've never heard of a pub quiz. I'm just like, what's that? And it's just like, every church charity or, some type of youth group, at one point or another, you go to an event and there's a pub quiz type thing that
Mm,
takes place. And it's just like generally like a good time. Do you know what I mean? And I think even when you think about hanging out with friends, when you play a game, it kind of lightens the mood. It creates memories.
yeah,
And
definitely.
when you start to think about children learn through play. Like that is
Mm,
actually the way that children learn about themselves, about, the things around them, about like the world. My son, when he was probably like one, um, it's not really like a game type of thing, but he would learn about things through like grabbing them and throwing them, and then just like watching to see what they would do. But it's a form of exploration. Do you know what I mean? So it's like game
definitely.
type of stuff. And so yeah, and I would agree with you that well, to add on to that actually is that video games are incredibly popular. Like it's absolutely ridiculous how popular video games are. So I saw a statistic from Yuki, right? Like the UK's like governing body for video games, right? They said that 2.7 billion people on Earth play video games, and there's only 2.2 billion Christians. And so to think that more people play video games than believe in Jesus,
Mm,
to me that's like a problem, right, in so many different ways. And it's something that I think that like people like you and me are trying to address almost, right? um because the crazy thing about video games is that they've only been around for about 50 years, right? um
mm,
and they've evolved, and they've like we are no longer, and this is one of the things that I try to get people to understand, like um I'm not one of these people that are like against older people, right? Like I have nothing wrong, like there's nothing wrong with older people, but a lot of the times when I start to bring up the video game conversation in Christianity, people who are probably like in the 50s and 60s, not all of them, but some of them, they tend to think about Pong, Tetris, and those types of games when I talk about video games. But actually, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me that like video games have evolved
mm,
so much that these are powerful digital experiences that people are stepping into. And actually, I think that most people are unaware of the first of all the thought and the effort that goes into creating a video game, the budget that goes into creating a video game, the time and the effort.
Mm.
There's a book, I don't know if you've read it or heard it. It's called Reality is Broken.
Mm.
Only video games can fix it. It's by a video game theorist called Jane McGonigal. She has a TED talk on like video games. She thinks that video games can solve every human problem. I disagree with her, but she has very interesting points. And one of the comparisons that she had to she's obviously like a secular video game theorist, but she had a really interesting comparison. She actually said that video games, like a game like Halo, is a modern day cathedral because of the time, effort, inspiration, money spent to create this thing. And I was just like, wow. Do you know what I mean? Like when somebody who's not Christian makes that type of comparison, um,
Mm.
I think it's a powerful statement, especially because of the significance, the symbolism, the importance of what a cathedral used to be, in some
Mm.
places still is, compared to today. And to think that video games are in one shape or form equal to that or replacing that, I think
Mm.
it's something that we as Christians should really think of. Do you know what I mean? Um, but listen, thank you for sharing about like what your actual game looks. So let's talk about your game for a little bit. Who is this like made for?
Yeah, well, the idea with the serpent and the seed is we want to make a game that is basically fun for anyone. I know sort of people kind of advise against that. You've got to have a target demographic, and I think so. We talk about kind of 9+ in that helps us with kind of decisions around vocabulary and
Mm.
difficulty and stuff like that.
Is this a mobile
But
game? Sorry.
it's a mobile game, yeah, and ultimately I want to play a game, make a game that I would enjoy playing. So
Yeah.
it's really inspired for me by this game called Sword and Sorcery that came out about 10 years ago. Uh, I don't think I would have ever heard of it if my boss hadn't sent it to me. He knew I was trying to make a game, and he said, "I think you'll enjoy this." It's this really kind of very kind of strange, unusual game, but it's got this incredible music, which is almost the main event, and the game is sort of constructed around the music as a almost something to do to help you whilst you listen to the music almost. But it's this amazing kind of poetic experience, and like you're saying about creating memories, like you play a game like that, and I have such powerful kind of emotions and memories associated with it, and I think wouldn't it be amazing to if if that kind of was associated with engaging with the Bible. And but I enjoyed that as a 20 something. I've recently introduced it to my two boys, and they equally loved it as a 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. So I don't think there has to be this sort of narrow demographic. It's definitely something that I want to be open to anyone. Like, you don't have to be a Christian by any means. It's designed for people who are not sort of necessarily professing Christians. Like,
That's really good.
they,
Yeah.
um, and I definitely, the idea is it's not something that's sort of cheesy and educational. I don't want lots of quizzes popping up, and we do want to get people into the Bible. We want to say, like, yeah, we're going to have this kind of book or kind of journal, I suppose, as the events unfold, where it will give you the references where you could go and look them up and read it for yourself. But it's told in a slightly more poetic, abstract kind of way. So
That's cool.
it's less kind of historical narrative and more kind of exploring the big Bible story rather
Mm.
than specific details. But so kind of adventure game, you kind of explore the garden. You can imagine the Garden of Eden. There's loads of life and interactivity, and uh, but also this kind of exploring this bigger question of like, why is the world the way it is?
Mm.
There's so much beauty in the world, so much amazing stuff, and yet there's also so much that's broken, like a pandemic or fuel crisis or political strife, but even within my own heart, why can't I even do the things that I want to do?
Mm.
Like, and sort of trying to, yeah. So really, we're setting that up as that is the protagonist's big kind of question in the game, really. I suppose why the world is broken and I need to find a cure, um, and yeah, there's sort of hints of it in the garden at the tree of life that Revelation says, it brings healing for the nations, and yet it's sort of just out of reach. They're kicked out of the garden, and so the rest of the game, I suppose, is the quest to get back to that tree of life.
Yo, that sounds amazing. I love how you just worded that. Like, even within my own heart, right? There's a tension and a friction and conflict about, I guess, kind of like what I want to do or should do and what I actually do, right? Which is, I think, what Paul
Mm.
talks about sometimes as well.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
sounds absolutely amazing. I think that, and especially like what you said about the like a poetry or a musical element. That sounds really, really cool. That sounds. I've not played the game that you said was kind of like the inspiration. But I do know that like there are some games that have really powerful musical elements to them, and that
Mm.
really stands out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In for the players, for the gamers, I think that's so good, and it's good to hear that there's not going to be a quiz about prayer or something like that, because I'm not going to name any names of any apps or stuff like that, but there are some games that do that, right? Like there are some apps for kids and stuff like that that kind of say something like, have you prayed today? And although those things are good, I think that sometimes they can be a bit intrusive. um
Yeah, I mean, I think that there can be a place for some of those kinds of things. So, the Bible app for kids is has been a bit of an inspiration for me, which is a fantastic app for like 3 or 4 year olds, like preschoolers,
mm,
where it's sort of telling Bible stories in a very interactive way, and then they will have like a little quiz at the end, like a question, one simple question, yes, no, true or false, based on the things you've heard. And I think there's a place for that, particularly perhaps for that younger age group.
yeah,
I don't think that's not going to cut the mustard when it comes to an adult who is not interested in Jesus. And um, yeah, we're trying to do something slightly different, which is make something that is a genuinely fun game in its own right,
yeah.
um, and that kind of plants that seed of interest in Jesus and how he fits into my own story today.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so the one I was thinking about is like it's meant for it's still a children's app. It's a game actually, but it's meant for older kids. And there's certain points in the game where it just kind of has a pop up screen, and it's like, "Have you prayed today?" And it's almost like a knee jerk moment, right? Where it's just like it had nothing to do with the game, it had nothing to do with anything that was on the screen. And I often see that like in youth clubs, right? And in youth groups, like you have an Xbox at church, finally, right? And you're playing like FIFA with like the young people. And then like whoever's there, like the youth pastor, one of the helpers, volunteers, or whoever's there, it's like the young person scores a goal, like, wow, that was a great goal. Do you know what else was great? When Jesus died on the cross. And you're just like, what? Like where did this come from? And then boom, conversation's over. Person never comes back to youth group. And I agree with you that actually um these games are experiences that have to be crafted um with a lot of I think that they can't have those types of things. There are places, I agree with you 100%, where those things are okay. But actually, if you're talking about like a video game, there's not a lot of actual successful big name video games that have those types of things in them. And just because we're Christians and we believe in Jesus, it doesn't mean that you sacrifice mission or spreading the gospel if you don't have something like that in it, which is I think what you're trying to accomplish. And I think it's great. Um, just two more things real quick. I don't want to take up all your time today. Um, we're kind of getting into before we start recording about how sometimes there's a bit of friction with Christianity in video games, with Christians in video games. Some people are like, no way, you can't have video games in church. These Jesus and video games, they just don't have anything to do with each other. I'm sure you've experienced some of that yourself. What do you have to say to people? I mean, you've said a lot already, um, But is there anything else that you would like to say as far as that goes? And actually, how do you see this growing in the future? Because I'm pretty
Mm,
sure you, like myself, this is a trend that has grown exponentially, and I believe that will continue to grow. It's not going anywhere. Like, we're not getting rid of
mm,
video games, right? Like, this isn't
yeah.
like MySpace. This is something significantly different. How do we get people to understand that?
Mm. I mean, I think there are different kinds of games, aren't there? And I wrestled with this myself as a Christian. I played a lot of video games growing up, probably too much. And I I
We
don't,
all have.
as
We
an
all
adult, well, I kind of went off computer games almost entirely, partly as perhaps an overreaction to that. But
Mm,
um, I think I, these days, like with my kids, for example, like we just got a Nintendo Switch, a bit behind the times, but I was deliberately, I mean, that was sort of on purpose. I like to be at least two generations behind the curve, I think. But I think a console where you can play team games together, to me, is much better than just spending hours trying to get really good at some kind of very skill based game. Although, I mean, you know, there's plenty of research about games can be good for hand-eye coordination and things like that, can't they? Which in turn can be good for your handwriting, or I don't know. But so I suppose I've developed more of a preference personally for those kind of slightly more story-driven games where you've got a very clear goal and a clear end. So I know, like, I invest this many hours and then it's done, and I'm not kind of endlessly hooked. Uh, Whereas I think some kind of shooter game that you just spend you could I think I've probably got much better things I could do with my life than just pouring hours into shooting people. But
especially as a
but
Christian, right?
Right, well, exactly. But I think they can be tremendously sociable. I've heard loads of stuff about how Among Us was really huge for kids during the pandemic. Of
Mhm.
they couldn't see each other face to face, and here's this video game which gives them a common activity where they can build friendship and stay connected. And I think there's something tremendously valuable about that. It's not kind of certainly not a sort of Christian activity, but it's serving something that you do believe is important, which is relationship. And
Mm.
um, my kids and I over this summer holiday have all been absolutely hooked on. Again, it's a few years behind the curve, but Stardew Valley, which is the sort of you know superficially kind of quite a silly kind of farming sim. You plant some crops and you water them, and it's all very delightful. And um, this I think we've really enjoyed that as a family. We've all kind of compared notes, and it's been really interesting to see the different play styles of the different children or myself. And um, it's taught them the value of like giving gifts to people, or like they've one of them in particular was dreadful at the kind of economic side of things, but just because he kept giving away all his best stuff, because he learned really quickly what the different villagers loved. And but it's really interesting to go back to our previous conversation about games teaching stuff. Even that game, there's this, you kind of get a score, almost like your grandfather visits you and he gives you a certain number of candles depending on what you've achieved. And but you get basically points for, you get more candles if you've got married and had kids. And essentially the game is teaching you that it's better for, you've done well if you've got married and had kids. And
Mm.
um, there's an implicit kind of worldview in that.
Yeah.
Well, not implicit at all. You know, and you know, I just found that really interesting that even this game that there's a definite kind of spirituality within the game. It's quite a sort of spirit-driven thing, and there's like you can watch for daily. Like you can get so far if you just ignore it, but ultimately there's a TV show where you can watch the daily fortune teller, which because every day has this underlying kind of luck value. And actually, if you want to really kind of achieve all the achievements, you actually need to know that. And it asks you quite interesting questions of how like I feel a bit uncomfortable as a Christian watching this fortune teller show. And
Mm.
you have to make choices. Am I gonna just forego those bits of the game? um yeah, so I found that quite an interesting experience, but that's totally off topic now, isn't it? But I think, to go back to your original question, yeah, I think not all games are equal, and I think just
Mm,
to write them off as, or lump them together as games that are evil, or not even evil. I don't think that was my uh, temptation. I think for me it was games are frivolous and pointless, and that that's probably perhaps where more people are at. And um, yeah, so uh, I think we just need. I don't necessarily plan to or expect to be able to persuade everyone that that
mm.
needn't be the case, but I hope as I just crack on and build it, people will see that there can be real value in it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love what you said that not all games are equal. I would agree with you 100% that like the same way that, music and TV and films, video games have different genres,
Mm,
right? And I think that as Christians, you have to think about what kind of genre of video game are you okay to play. Obviously,
mm,
um, again, I agree with you what you said. Like some games, actually, it was interesting that you pointed out that like a narrative video game, there is kind of like a start and a finish. Um,
mm,
and with something like Fortnite, for example, it's just that endless, um, kind of like mayhem spree, right? Like where you can just constantly it has like a lot of replay value. Um, and actually, do you want to play Fortnite constantly? Do you know what I mean?
mm, mm,
Do you want to be in those mind states, 24/7, and the things that you're getting from that you're not achieving in real life, is that okay as well?
mm.
Those are things that we have to think about. And as Christians, how do you theologically sit there and kind of justify,
Yeah,
killing everybody
yeah.
that you see on the screen? I don't think you
Mm,
can, if I'm honest with
mm,
you. However, and this is the other thing, right? I think that for me, when I read scripture, I think that because Jesus always talks about children, and he's like, "Let the children come to me." To me, um, like some of us, we have, like, I guess as adults, some adults are friendly towards children, right? Like I have a friend
mm,
who, whenever he sees like a little kid, he'll just start play fighting with the kid. Like he's amazing with children, right? And at first, before I had kids, I'm like, this guy's kind of weird, right? and then
mm.
and then once I had my son, I really appreciated this really kind of like childish nature of my friend, and just the ability to approach children with a confidence, right? So where you could just like get in there and play with them, and children just being so receptive to him. And when I think about like, Jesus talking about kids, and to be honest with you, even watching like The Chosen, there's like a couple of scenes in The Chosen where Jesus is like, he's hanging out with the kids and he's teaching them scripture, and um he's like a friendly child. He has like a childish nature to him at times when appropriate. And I think that because of those things, I believe that would Jesus play video games? 100%. Like there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus would play video games. Would he play Fortnite with you all night? Absolutely not. Like I don't think that he would, right? But would he play like something that is appropriate, whatever that may be, right? I think that he would. Do you know what I mean? I would have said Stardew Valley, but I don't know. You said you had an issue with the fortune teller, so maybe he wouldn't play Stardew Valley. But do you kind of see where I'm getting at? And I think that again, that like as Christians, we have to be selective. We have to be wise and discerning when it
Mm,
comes to video games, because 100% you were right, not all video games are equal. And I think that you brought up another really good point, that as parents or carers that who have children that play video games, it's our job to kind of point out the things that could hold Christian value, right? Like you
mm,
said, there's, your son loves to share. That is a Christian value. And if you make that connection for him and with him while you're there with him playing the game, okay, guess what? Now he's like, yeah, cool. This is something that we do in real life and I can do in the
mm.
game. And Jesus loves it when I do it. Do you know what I mean? On the
Yeah.
contrary, if you just let your kids play shooting games all night, it would
Mm,
be really difficult for them to find like a positive meaning or association to real life in that.
mm.
um, Andy, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything
Welcome.
else you'd like to say? Where can we get a hold of you? What is your website? Everything, please. Where can we get a
Yeah.
hold of you, man?
Yeah, well, Twitter is a good place. So I'm there as Andy Geers, or the game is there, Serpent Seed Game. Or if you go to our website, so it's discipleship.tech/serpent seed game, and there you can sign up to our mailing list and find out more about the project, and um, or yeah, Instagram, Facebook as well. So yeah, I mean, we need a kind of whole community of people supporting us if we're going to pull it off. So it'd be great to connect with people.
Amazing. Everybody, please go check him out. Show some love, support. We need more of these projects. This thing is, video games are global, and we need as many Christians with Andy's mindset and heart, I think, as well, in this space to really, really make a difference. And I know that I pray that your project be a success and that people get around you and really just that it takes off, man, because after hearing you speak, I just absolutely love it. I think it's going to be amazing. So Andy, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for watching. Bless you guys. Bye.
Bye bye.